She told all her secrets to the handsome stranger in the coffee shop, not knowing he was the billionaire CEO she would have to face the next morning. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what's the biggest secret you've ever spilled to a complete stranger? And at the end of the story, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Enjoy. He's a ghost, Amanda Thomas declared to the disinterested foam art on her latte. A phantom. The spreadsheet specter. For 6 weeks, I have worked for a man who communicates exclusively through cryptic, single-sentence emails sent at 3 a.m. She took a frantic sip of coffee, the caffeine barely making a dent in her anxiety. And tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock sharp, I have to present my entire project to him. A man I have never seen. A man whose only known personality trait is an obsession with aesthetically pleasing quarterly reports. She shuddered. Who even says that? He probably wants the numbers organized by color. The man sitting at the small table next to hers looked up from his newspaper, a flicker of amusement in his deep blue eyes. He was handsome, in a quiet, rugged way, dressed in a simple gray sweater that looked ridiculously comfortable. He had been pretending to read the same article about municipal bonds for the past 10 minutes. "Sounds like you're not a fan of your new boss," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. Amanda jumped, startled. She had been so lost in her spiral of panic that she had forgotten she was in a public coffee shop and not her own head. "Oh no," she groaned, her cheeks flushing a bright, furious red. "Did I just say all of that out loud?" And with a great deal of passion, the man confirmed, a small, kind smile playing on his lips. The part about the spreadsheet specter was particularly vivid. "Ugh, kill me now," she mumbled, sinking lower in her chair. "I am so sorry. It's been a long week. A long 6 weeks, actually. I sound like a lunatic." "You sound like someone who's under a lot of pressure," he corrected gently. "This new CEO, he's really shaken things up?" "Shaken things up?" Amanda let out a short, hysterical laugh. "He's a corporate poltergeist. He haunts the building. No one has seen him. He just leaves a trail of terrifyingly efficient policy changes in his wake. Morale is at an all-time low. We're all convinced he's either a vampire or a highly advanced AI that lives in the server room." The man took a slow sip of his own coffee, his eyes twinkling with a light she couldn't quite decipher. "And what do you do when you're not hunting vampires?" "I'm an architect," she said. "I'm leading the design for the new Aberdeen Tower downtown, or at least I'm trying to. My old boss, Mr. Gable, was amazing. He believed in bold, creative, human-centered design. Then he retired, and this phantom, Quentin Aberdeen, took over." The man's smile didn't falter, but something in his eyes sharpened. "And Aberdeen doesn't like your design?" he prompted. "I have no idea," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up in frustration. "He's never seen it. I just get these decrees. The foyer requires a more aggressive statement of market dominance. The rooftop garden lacks a quantifiable return on investment. I'm an architect, not a hedge fund manager. I'm designing a building for people to live and work in, not a monument to his ego." She was on a roll now, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pent-up frustration. "And the worst part is, the design is brilliant. It's the best work I've ever done. It's innovative, it's sustainable, it has an actual beehive on the roof to promote local biodiversity. And tomorrow, I have to walk in there and defend my beautiful bee-friendly building to a man who probably thinks Synergy is a breakfast cereal." She finally ran out of steam, slumping back in her chair, breathless. She looked at the handsome stranger, who was watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated fascination. "Wow," she said, her cheeks burning again. "I am so sorry. You just wanted to read your paper in peace, and I just unloaded 6 weeks of career-ending treason on you. Please don't tell anyone I said my new billionaire boss eats Synergy for breakfast." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made her stomach do a little flip. "Your secret is safe with me, but for what it's worth, the beehive sounds brilliant." "It is," she said, leaning forward, her passion reignited. "It's about community and sustainability and creating a space that gives back more than it takes. That's the story I'm trying to tell with the building." "Then that's the story you should tell him," he said, his voice suddenly serious. "Forget the quarterly reports and the market dominance. Tell him about the bees." He'll laugh me out of the room, she said with a sigh. Or, the man said, his blue eyes locking with hers, he'll finally see something real. Maybe this phantom CEO isn't looking for someone who just follows the rules. Maybe he's looking for someone who can write new ones. His words, the sheer, unexpected astuteness of them, caught her off guard. It was the smartest, most insightful thing anyone had said to her all week. That's surprisingly good advice, she admitted. For a guy who's been pretending to read about municipal bonds for half an hour. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. It was a very interesting article. She smiled, a real, genuine smile for the first time that day. Well, thank you, handsome stranger. You may have just saved my career, or gotten me fired spectacularly. Either way, it'll be a good story. She gathered her things, her anxiety replaced by a new, unfamiliar flicker of confidence. I should go. I have a date with a poltergeist in the morning. Good luck, Amanda, he said. She paused. I never told you my name. A slow, devastatingly charming smile spread across his face. It was on your coffee cup. She glanced at her cup. Sure enough, in messy black marker, Amanda. She laughed, shaking her head. Right, of course. Well, thanks again, Miss Quentin, he said, his eyes sparkling. Just Quentin. Well, Quentin, she said, her heart giving a little flutter she chose to ignore. You're a good listener. Anytime, he said. She walked out of the coffee shop, a new spring in her step. She felt lighter, braver. The handsome, mysterious Quentin had been a welcome port in her storm. She found herself wishing she had gotten his number. Oh well, she thought. It's not like I'll ever see him again. Back at the coffee shop, Quentin Aberdeen watched her go, a slow, complicated smile on his face. He took out his phone and sent a text to his assistant. Jonathan, the 9 o'clock meeting tomorrow. I want a beehive on the roof. A big one. Make it happen. He then took a sip of his now cold coffee and let out a low groan. This was going to be the most awkward and the most interesting meeting of his entire life. The next morning, Amanda stood outside the CEO's office on the 80th floor, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. Okay, Brooks. Game face, she told herself. You are a brilliant architect. You are a friend to bees. You are not afraid of a man who uses synergy as a verb. The secretary, a woman who looked like she was carved from ice, nodded curtly. Mr. Aberdeen will see you now. Amanda took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The office was vast and minimalist, dominated by a single, massive desk and a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a commanding view of the city. A man was standing by the window, his back to her, looking out at his kingdom. The Phantom himself. Mr. Aberdeen, she said, her voice a little shakier than she would have liked. Miss Thomas, his voice rumbled, the same deep, calm voice she had heard in the coffee shop. Her blood ran cold. No, it can't be. He turned around slowly. It was him, the handsome stranger, Quentin. But he wasn't wearing a soft gray sweater. He was wearing a suit so sharp and so powerful it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. The kind, amused eyes from yesterday were now cool, sharp, and assessing. They were the eyes of a king. Amanda felt the floor drop out from under her. Every single word she had said, every insult, every complaint, every paranoid theory about vampires and AIs came rushing back to her in a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated horror. He walked toward her, a slow, deliberate stride, a completely unreadable expression on his face. He stopped in front of her. Miss Thomas, he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He leaned in, his lips close to her ear, and whispered the one sentence that confirmed her entire world had just ended. Tell me about the bees. Amanda felt the blood drain from her face. It was a sensation so sudden and so absolute, she was vaguely surprised she was still standing. The handsome, kind, intelligent man from the coffee shop, the one she had used as a free therapy session, the one to whom she had confessed every single career-ending, insubordinate thought she'd had for the past 6 weeks, was Quentin Aberdeen. The spreadsheet specter. The Phantom. The man who probably ate synergy for breakfast. Her brain, in a desperate act of self-preservation, began to play a highlight reel of her own treason. He's a ghost, her own voice echoed in her head. A corporate poltergeist? We're all convinced he's either a vampire or a highly advanced AI that lives in the server room. A man who probably thinks synergy is a breakfast cereal. Oh dear, the synergy comment. That was the one that was going to get her fired. No, wait, the vampire comment. Definitely the vampire comment. Who calls their new billionaire CEO a vampire and lives to tell the tale? He was still standing there, inches from her, that same devastatingly handsome face now a mask of cool, unreadable authority. The warm, comfortable sweater was gone, replaced by a suit that was so perfectly tailored it looked less like clothing and more like a weapon. The amused glint in his eyes was gone, replaced by the sharp, assessing gaze of a predator who had just cornered its very, very stupid prey. "The bees, Miss Thomas," he repeated, his voice no longer a warm rumble, but a low, dangerous purr that sent a shiver of pure terror down her spine. "You were going to tell me about them. I'm fascinated." He straightened up and walked past her, the scent of expensive cologne and ozone trailing in his wake. He settled behind the massive desk at the far end of the room, the city skyline framing him like a dark halo. He didn't sit. He stood, a king surveying his domain, and gestured to the single solitary chair placed in the vast expanse of empty space before his desk. The hot seat, the executioner's block. "Please," he said, the word a command, not an invitation. Amanda's legs felt like they were made of wet sand. She forced herself to walk, each step an agonizing journey across what felt like miles of polished concrete. She sat, placing her portfolio on her lap like a flimsy shield. Her mind was a frantic, screaming void. What's the protocol for this? Is there a chapter in the employee handbook for what to do when you've accidentally called the chairman a blood-sucking fiend? He steepled his fingers, his blue eyes fixed on her, missing nothing. "You seem flustered, Miss Thomas. Cat got your tongue?" "You!" she wanted to scream. "You're the cat who has my tongue, my career, and my entire future in his claws." Instead, she just swallowed hard. "Mr. Aberdeen," she began, her voice a squeak. "About yesterday." "Ah, yes, yesterday," he said, a flicker of something, amusement, cruelty in his eyes. "A most illuminating conversation. I was particularly intrigued by the theory that I am a piece of sentient software living in the server room. It would certainly explain my efficiency." She was going to be sick, right here on his priceless Persian rug. I can explain," she stammered. "I was under a lot of pressure. I was just venting to a stranger. I never in a million years thought that the stranger might be the man whose professional character you were so passionately assassinating," he finished for her. He leaned forward, his expression turning deadly serious. "Miss Thomas, let me be clear. I am not interested in your apologies. I am not interested in your excuses. I am interested in one thing, and one thing only, the future of Aberdeen Tower." He gestured to her portfolio. "You have 30 minutes to convince me that the woman who designed this building is a visionary architect and not the paranoid insubordinate employee I met yesterday. Your time starts now. Proceed." It was a death sentence. A 30-minute countdown to professional oblivion. He wasn't just going to fire her. He was going to watch her squirm first. He was going to make her perform, make her present, her heart and soul, and then he was going to crush it. For a second, she almost gave up. She could just stand up, apologize again, and walk out. It would be easier, less humiliating. She could go back to freelance work, designing logos for pickle companies. It was safe. Then she remembered the stranger's words. The kind, handsome stranger who had, for a brief, magical moment, made her feel brave. Tell him about the bees. Was that a genuine piece of advice? Or was it just another part of his cruel, elaborate test? Was he trying to see if she was brave enough to follow through, or foolish enough to fall for his trick? She looked at her portfolio, at the plans she had poured her heart and soul into for the better part of a year. It was the best work she had ever done. It was bold and beautiful, and it deserved to be defended with passion, not presented with a whimper. Screw it, she thought. If I'm going to go down, I'm going down in a blaze of glory. With bees. She took a deep, shuddering breath, stood up, and walked to the large presentation screen on the wall. She didn't open her portfolio to the boring, data-driven slides she had prepared for the spreadsheet specter. She opened it to a concept rendering, a beautiful sun-drenched image of the rooftop garden, filled with people, lush greenery, and the faint, golden hum of honeybees. "Mr. Aberdeen," she began, her voice surprisingly steady, "you've received my quarterly reports. You've seen the ROI projections. You know that this building is projected to be the most profitable piece of real estate in the city. But numbers don't tell the whole story, because a building isn't just an asset. It's an ecosystem. It's a heart that pumps life into the city around it. Quentin watched her, his expression unreadable, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a statue carved from judgment. She pressed on, her passion overriding her fear. Your email spoke of market dominance, but dominance is a cold, dead thing. It's a fortress. I'm proposing something more radical. I'm proposing influence. A building that doesn't just dominate the skyline, but enriches the community. A building that breathes. She clicked to the next slide, an architectural drawing of the open-air foyer. You said the foyer needed a more aggressive statement. I disagree. Aggression is a wall. I've designed a space that is a bridge. It invites the public in, with a gallery for local artists, a small cafe. It says we are a part of this city, not just above it. A public gallery generates no revenue, Miss Thomas. A new voice cut in. Amanda turned. A man in his late 50s, with a slick, self-satisfied look, had entered the office and taken a seat at the side of the room. Gregory, the COO, a notorious sycophant. It is a drain on resources, a security risk. It's an investment in cultural capital, Gregory, Amanda countered, her voice sharp. She had forgotten he would be here. It turns the building into a landmark, a destination. The foot traffic alone will drive up the value of the retail spaces. Gregory just sniffed, unconvinced. Amanda turned her attention back to Quentin, the only person in the room who mattered. She clicked to the next slide. The beehive. And this, she said, her voice softening, is the heart of the project. The part that, I admit, has no quantifiable return on investment. Then why is it in the plan? Gregory interjected, his voice dripping with disdain. Are we in the business of architecture or agriculture? Amanda ignored him, her eyes locked on Quentin's. It's in the plan because a city is an ecosystem, and for the past 50 years, we've been poisoning it. We've been building glass and steel tombs that take and take and take. This gives something back. It supports the local environment. It produces honey that we can sell in the cafe, with proceeds going to community gardens in the neighborhood. It tells a story. It says that Aberdeen Corporation isn't just building another tower, it's building a future. A greener, more sustainable, more human one. She finally finished, her heart pounding, her chest heaving with the force of her conviction. She had done it. She had told him about the bees. She had defended her beautiful bee-friendly building with every ounce of passion she had. The silence that followed was deafening. Gregory was looking at her as if she had just proposed they replace the elevators with rope swings. Quentin's expression was still completely, infuriatingly unreadable. He stood up from behind his desk and walked slowly towards her. He stopped in front of the presentation screen, his eyes fixed on the rendering of the rooftop garden. The quantifiable return on investment for the beehive, Gregory, Quentin said, his voice a low, thoughtful murmur, not even looking at his COO, is that it will be the most talked about, most photographed, and most beloved feature of any building in this city. It will become the symbol of the new Aberdeen brand, a brand that is innovative, forward-thinking, and not run by soulless bean counters who lack imagination. He finally turned his head, fixing Gregory with a look so cold it could cause frostbite. Are we clear? Gregory, who had turned a pale, sickly shade of gray, just nodded, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Quentin turned his gaze back to Amanda. The cold, assessing look was gone, replaced by a flicker of the same warmth she had seen in the coffee shop, a flicker of genuine, impressed respect. The design, he said, his voice returning to that low, dangerous purr, is adequate. There are several structural and financial points we need to address in detail. He walked back towards his desk. Gregory, you may go. Send my thanks to the rest of the team. Miss Thomas and I will be handling the project directly from here on out. Gregory practically scrambled out of the room, eager to escape the suddenly lethal atmosphere. The heavy oak doors clicked shut, leaving Amanda alone with the phantom once more. The silence stretched. She didn't know what to do. Was she fired? Was she promoted? Had she just witnessed a man get executed via corporate jargon? He finally looked at her, and a slow, devastatingly charming smile spread across his face, the same smile from the coffee shop. The king was gone. Quentin was back. So, he said, leaning back against his desk, the picture of casual power, vampire or highly advanced AI, I'm dying to know which one you settled on. The sheer audacious nerve of the man. After putting her through the most stressful, terrifying 30 minutes of her life, he was just going to joke? A bubble of hysterical, relief-filled laughter escaped her lips. "Good heavens," she said, shaking her head as she finally blessedly sat down. "I am so fired." "On the contrary, Miss Thomas," he said, his eyes twinkling. "You've just been given a promotion. You are now in a working group of one, reporting directly to me. Congratulations." "That doesn't feel like a promotion," she said, her head spinning. "That feels like a punishment, a very, very hands-on punishment." "The punishment," he said, walking towards her, "would have been if you had given me the boring, soulless, aesthetically pleasing presentation you thought I wanted. The one that was all numbers and no B's." He stopped in front of her chair, looking down at her. "I've spent the last month surrounded by yes-men and sycophants like Gregory. They tell me what they think I want to hear. Yesterday in that coffee shop, for the first time in a very long time, someone told me the truth." "I told you I thought you were a poltergeist who ate synergy for breakfast," she protested. "Exactly," he said, a genuine warmth in his voice. "It was the most honest and refreshing conversation I've had all year." He grew serious. "I didn't tell you who I was, Amanda, because for 10 minutes, I wasn't a CEO. I was just a guy getting some surprisingly good advice about his new, ridiculously difficult job from a brilliant, passionate woman who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. I didn't want that moment to end." She looked up at him, at the sincerity in his eyes, and her heart did a stupid, traitorous little flip. "So this whole terrifying ordeal, it was a test?" "It was a confirmation," he corrected gently. "I needed to see if the architect was as brave as the woman in the coffee shop. You are." He held out his hand. "The project is approved, Amanda, beehives and all, but from now on, every decision, every change, every line item goes through me. We're going to be working very, very closely together." She stared at his outstretched hand. This was a nightmare. A beautiful, terrifying, career-making nightmare. She was now in a forced partnership with the man she had accidentally spilled all her secrets to. A man who now knew she thought he was a vampire. A man who was, infuriatingly, even more handsome up close than he had been in the coffee shop. With a deep sigh that was equal parts dread and a strange, thrilling excitement, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. "Okay, Mr. Aberdeen," she said, "you've got a deal." "Please," he said, his thumb gently tracing a line across her knuckles, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm. "Call me Quentin." Working very, very closely with Quentin Aberdeen turned out to be the understatement of the century. Amanda's life, which had previously been a predictable rhythm of drafting tables, client calls, and quiet nights in, was now a high-speed collision of two worlds. Her world, grounded in the tangible reality of concrete, steel, and ergonomic design, and his, an abstract universe of market projections, shareholder value, and a schedule that was planned with the ruthless precision of a military campaign. Their working group of one became a daily, and often nightly, reality. He was a demanding, meticulous, and infuriatingly hands-on boss. He didn't just want to see the plans. He wanted to understand the why behind every single choice. He would summon her to his office at a moment's notice to debate the psychological impact of a particular shade of blue in the lobby, or to question the aerodynamic efficiency of the fins on the building's facade. For Amanda, it was both exhausting and exhilarating. He was pushing her, challenging her, forcing her to defend her creative choices with a level of intellectual rigor she had never been asked for before. But underneath the demanding CEO, she kept catching glimpses of Quentin, the handsome stranger from the coffee shop, the man with the kind, amused eyes and the surprisingly insightful advice. One afternoon, they were in his office, locked in a heated debate over the choice of wood for the executive boardroom. "I'm telling you, reclaimed oak is the way to go," she argued, pointing to a sample on the table. "It's warm, it has character, it tells a story. It says the company has history, stability." "It says the company is old," Quentin countered, running a hand over a sleek, dark sample of ebony. "This is what we need. Ebony. It's powerful, it's modern, it's dominant." "Ugh, that word again," Amanda groaned, throwing her hands up in frustration. "You and your market dominance. This is a room where people are supposed to collaborate, not a throne room for a corporate warlord. You put ebony walls in there, and everyone will be too intimidated to speak. It's the architectural equivalent of a death metal soundtrack." He paused, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He looked at the ebony, then back at her. A death metal soundtrack? Absolutely, she said, pressing her advantage. It's aggressive, it's cold, the only thing you'll be dominating is your employees' will to live. Reclaimed oak it's like a classic rock album. It's familiar, it's comfortable, it makes people feel good. He was quiet for a long moment, a slow, thoughtful smile spreading across his face. A classic rock album, he mused. He looked at her, and the CEO was gone, replaced by Quentin. You are the only person on this entire continent who would ever describe a building material in terms of its musical genre. It's called creative thinking, she said, a small smile playing on her own lips. You should try it sometime. It's more fun than synergy. He flinched, a theatrical wince of pain. Ouch. Low blow, Thomas. I thought we were past the synergy comment. We'll be past it when you stop using words like market dominance to describe a piece of wood. She retorted, but there was no heat in it. Only the easy, playful banter that had become the soundtrack of their working relationship. Fine, he said, pushing the ebony sample away. You win. Classic rock it is. But if I find my board members growing long hair and wearing leather pants, I'm holding you personally responsible. It was in these moments that she felt the strange, thrilling pull of the man behind the myth. He wasn't a phantom, he wasn't a vampire. He was a person. A person who was smart and funny and who, despite his best efforts to hide it, seemed to genuinely value her opinion. The lines between their professional and personal lives began to blur. Late nights in the office, fueled by takeout and a shared obsession with getting the project right, started to feel less like work and more like something else. Something that made her heart beat a little faster every time he would lean in close to look at a blueprint, his arm brushing against hers, the clean, sharp scent of his cologne filling her senses. One evening, they were still in the office well past midnight. The rest of the tower was dark and silent. They were hunched over a large, complex 3D model of the building, trying to solve a tricky ventilation issue in the sublevels. It's just not working, Amanda said, running a hand through her already messy hair in frustration. The airflow is all wrong. We're going to have to redesign the entire HVAC system. It'll set us back weeks. No, Quentin said, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he stared at the model. There's a simpler solution. We're just not seeing it. He was no longer the CEO. He was an engineer, a problem solver, his mind working with a fierce, focused intensity that she found surprisingly attractive. He walked around the model, his gaze scanning every angle. It's a pressure issue, he murmured, almost to himself. We're trying to push the air when we should be pulling it. He pointed to a small, seemingly insignificant maintenance shaft on the model. What's this? It's just a service corridor for the electrical conduits, she said, dismissing it. Is it? He asked. He leaned in closer. What if it wasn't? What if we widened it, just by a few feet, and turned it into a central air intake plenum? We could create a natural convection current that would pull the air through the sublevels instead of trying to force it. She stared at him, then at the model, her own architect's brain catching up with his logic. It was brilliant. It was a simple, elegant, and completely unorthodox solution that would not only solve their problem, but would also be more energy efficient. It was the kind of out-of-the-box thinking she prided herself on, and he had just done it effortlessly. That, she said, her voice filled with a genuine, impressed awe, that would actually work. He looked at her, a slow, satisfied smile on his face. Not bad for a guy who eats synergy for breakfast, huh? She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that echoed in the quiet of the vast, empty office. Okay, she conceded. That was impressive. Where did a corporate poltergeist learn so much about HVAC systems? My first job at the company, when I was 16, he said, his smile fading slightly, replaced by a distant, nostalgic look. My father wanted me to learn the business from the ground up, so he had me spend a summer working with the maintenance crew in the basement of the old Aberdeen building. I spent 3 months cleaning air filters and mapping out ductwork. I hated every second of it. But, he added, a wry grin returning, I guess some of it stuck. It was the first time he had ever volunteered a piece of personal information about his past. A small, simple story, but it felt like a gift. She saw a glimpse of the boy he had been, the 16-year-old prince forced to work in the dungeons of his father's castle. "So you're not a vampire, then?" she asked softly. He looked at her, the playful banter gone, his expression now serious and a little vulnerable. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "Just a guy who spent a lot of time in a basement." The moment stretched, thick with an unspoken intimacy. They were no longer the CEO and the architect. They were just two people, standing in the quiet of a late night, sharing a story. We should probably call it a night," she said, her voice a little breathless as she broke the spell. "Yeah," he said, his own voice sounding a little rough. "Yeah, you're right." He insisted on driving her home. Not in his sleek, black town car with a driver's own personal car, a surprisingly understated vintage Aston Martin that he drove with a controlled, graceful speed. The ride through the sleeping city was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence now, filled with the easy rhythm of two people who were beginning to understand each other. When he pulled up in front of her brownstone, he didn't just drop her off. He got out and walked her to the door. "Thank you, Quentin," she said, as they stood on her stoop, the streetlights casting a soft golden glow around them. "For tonight. You saved the project." "You would have figured it out," he said, shrugging, but she could see the pleasure in his eyes. "Maybe," she said, "but it was better with a partner." The word hung in the air between them, full of a weight and a meaning she hadn't intended. "Amanda," he began, his voice low and serious. He took a step closer, and her heart began to hammer against her ribs. This was it. The moment the line between them was finally, irrevocably going to be crossed. But before he could say another word, a sleek, black town car, the same kind he usually had drive him, pulled up silently to the curb. The back window glided down, revealing a woman in her late 20s with sharp, beautiful features and an expression of cool, impatient disapproval. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than Amanda's rent for a year. "Quentin," the woman said, her voice a sharp, cultured clip. "There you are. I've been calling you. We're going to be late for the symphony." Quentin froze, a look of pure, frustrated agony on his face. He took a step back from Amanda, the intimate space between them instantly shattered. "Veronica," he said, his voice tight with an annoyance he was barely trying to hide. "I told you I was working." "Working?" Veronica said, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows raising as she gave Amanda a dismissive, head-to-toe once-over. "Is that what you call it now?" She gave Amanda a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "You must be the architect. Quentin's told me almost nothing about you." Amanda felt a cold, unpleasant knot form in her stomach. So this was his world. A world of beautiful, sharp-edged women in expensive dresses, who talked about the symphony and looked at her like she was something they had found on the bottom of their shoe. "It was a pleasure to meet you," Amanda said, her voice clipped and polite as she turned and fumbled for her keys. "Amanda, wait," Quentin said, his voice pleading. But she didn't wait. She found her key, unlocked her door, and slipped inside, closing it firmly behind her, leaving him on the stoop with the beautiful, hostile woman in the black car. She leaned against the door, her heart aching with a feeling she couldn't quite name. It was a mixture of disappointment and humiliation and a strange, bitter jealousy. She had been a fool. A fool to think that the late-night conversations and the shared laughter meant anything. A fool to think that a man like him, a man who lived in a world of symphonies and women named Veronica, could ever be a part of her world. He was the spreadsheet specter. He was a corporate poltergeist. And she had been an idiot to ever let herself believe he could be anything more. The next morning, the office felt like a refrigerator. An Arctic chill seemed to emanate from the 80th floor, seeping down through the vents and into every corner of the building. The easy, collaborative energy that had started to blossom between Amanda and Quentin was gone, replaced by a cold, brutally efficient professionalism. He didn't summon her to his office. Instead, he communicated the old way, through cryptic, single-sentence emails. From Q Aberdeen to A Thomas, subject foyer materials. The public gallery concept is a security bottleneck. Redesign with a focus on restricted access. Final drafts by end of day. Subject rooftop garden. The Beehive initiative is a potential liability for company insurance. Remove it from the plan. Each email was a small, precise dagger to the heart of the project they had been building together. He was systematically dismantling every creative, human-centric idea, every piece of her vision that he had claimed to admire. He was killing the bees. Amanda sat at her desk, staring at the emails, a cold, hard knot of anger tightening in her chest. So this was it. The moment the clock struck midnight and the handsome stranger turned back into the spreadsheet specter. Veronica, the symphony, the sleek black car, it had all been a harsh, unwelcome reminder of who he really was. And now, he was retreating back into the safety of his corporate fortress, pulling up the drawbridge behind him. Fine, she thought, a fierce, defiant fire igniting in her blood. If he wants to be the Phantom, then I'll be the ghost hunter. She didn't reply to his emails. She didn't revise the plans. Instead, she gathered her material samples, her blueprints, and a healthy dose of righteous indignation, and marched up to the 80th floor. She didn't have an appointment. She didn't care. She blew past the icy secretary, ignoring her startled protests, and pushed open the heavy oak doors to his office. He was standing by the window, exactly as he had been the first day, a dark silhouette against the city skyline. "The answer is no," she announced, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even herself. He turned around slowly, his face a perfect, unreadable mask. "Excuse me?" "No," she repeated, walking towards him, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the polished concrete floor. "I will not be turning the foyer into a corporate bunker. And I will absolutely, 100%, not be removing the bees. The bees are non-negotiable." He just stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher. "Miss Thomas," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You are my employee. You will do as you are instructed." "No, I won't," she shot back, stopping just a few feet from him. "Because I'm not just your employee. I'm the architect of this building. And you hired me for my vision. The vision you said you admired. The one with the art gallery and the open spaces and those blasted bees. You don't get to praise my courage one day and then demand my obedience the next. Just because some woman in an expensive dress reminded you that you're supposed to be a cold, heartless billionaire." The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and glittering. "This has nothing to do with Veronica," he said, his jaw tightening. "Doesn't it?" she challenged, taking a step closer. "You were fine with the bees before the symphony. You were a classic rock album, remember? Now you're back to being a death metal soundtrack. What changed, Quentin?" He looked away, his gaze falling on the city below. "Veronica is a family friend," he said, the words stiff and formal. "It's a long-standing arrangement." "An arrangement?" she repeated, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "Wow, you really do live in a different world, don't you? In my world, we call that a date. And when you're on a date with one woman, you don't show up on another woman's doorstep right after." "It wasn't a date," he said, his voice a low growl of frustration. "It was an obligation. My father arranged it." "Oh, your father," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The man who wanted you to learn about the business by cleaning air filters in a basement. He sounds like a real peach, and his taste in women is just as stellar." "Leave my father out of this," he snapped. "I would love to," she shot back. "But he seems to be in every corner of your life, doesn't he? Pulling the strings, arranging your obligations. Is he the one who told you to kill the bees too? Does Elias Aberdeen have a personal vendetta against local biodiversity?" He finally looked at her, and she saw it. A flash of the old Quentin, the man from the coffee shop, the man who was tired and lonely and trapped. "This project," he began, his voice losing its hard edge, "it needs to be unassailable. Perfect. Every line item, every projection. My father is watching my every move. He's waiting for me to fail. A rooftop garden with no quantifiable ROI. It's a weakness. It's an indulgence he will use as a weapon against me." So that was it. Fear. He was running scared. He wasn't retreating from her. He was retreating from his father. Her anger, so hot and fierce just moments before, began to cool, replaced by a wave of something else, a fierce, protective empathy. "So what?" she said, her voice softening. "You're just gonna gut the whole project? You're gonna strip it of its soul just to please a man you don't even like?" She took another step closer, their bodies now only a foot apart. "You told me you were done with that world. You told me you wanted to be the man who writes new rules, not the one who just follows the old ones. Was that all just a lie?" I am trying to protect the project, he insisted, his voice a low, desperate murmur. And you? I don't need your protection, she said, her voice now a whisper. I need my partner. The one who helped me solve the HVAC problem. The one who isn't afraid of a fight. She looked him right in the eye. Where did that guy go? He stared at her, a silent, tortured battle raging in his eyes. The king and the man, the CEO and Quentin, the fortress and the basement. And then in a move that was so unexpected, so contrary to his cold, controlled persona, he reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, his thumb gently tracing a line along her jaw. The touch was electric, a jolt of pure, unfiltered honesty in the sterile, silent office. He's right here, he whispered, his voice full of a raw, painful sincerity, and he's terrified. The confession, so simple and so vulnerable, shattered the last of her anger. This wasn't a corporate battle, it was a human one. Good, she whispered back, her own hand rising to cover his. So am I. Now let's go save some bees. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face. A real smile. A Quentin smile. Okay, he said. Okay, but if my father stages a hostile takeover of the rooftop garden, I'm blaming you. Deal? She said, her own smile matching his. The tension broke, the Arctic chill in the office finally, blessedly, melting away. But they didn't move. They just stood there, his hand on her cheek, her hand on his, the vast city spread out behind them, a silent witness to a truce that felt infinitely more important than any merger. The sound of the office doors swinging open shattered the moment. Quentin, darling, Veronica stopped dead in the doorway, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Her perfectly composed face, for the first time, registered a flicker of genuine shock. She looked at their hands, at the way they were standing so close, at the unspoken intimacy that filled the space between them, and her expression hardened into a mask of pure, icy fury. Well, she said, her voice a silken, venomous purr. It seems the architect is more of a hands-on consultant than I realized. Amanda snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned, a hot blush of shame and anger flooding her cheeks. Quentin, however, didn't move. He didn't flinch. He just dropped his own hand and turned to face Veronica, his expression now completely, utterly cold. Veronica, he said, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. What are you doing here? Your father sent me, she said, gliding into the room, a picture of expensive, effortless elegance. He was worried you were distracted, and it seems his concerns were justified. She gave Amanda another one of her dismissive, head-to-toe looks. Honestly, Quentin, overalls, is that what you're into now? It's so rustic. What I am into, Veronica, Quentin said, his voice dangerously quiet, is none of your concern. Nor is my business with Miss Thomas. Oh, but it is, she said with a little laugh. When your distractions start to interfere with the Aberdeen brand, it becomes everyone's concern. A CEO can't be seen cavorting with the help. It's unseemly. The help? Amanda repeated, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The shock and humiliation were burning away, replaced by the familiar hot fire of her temper. Lady, I am the lead architect on a billion-dollar project. The only help here is you, and you seem to be helping yourself to a conversation you weren't invited to. Veronica's smile tightened. How quaint. The little worker bee has a stinger. She turned her back on Amanda, dismissing her completely, and focused her attention on Quentin. Quentin, your father is hosting the annual hospital benefit gala this Friday. He expects you to be there. With me, we need to present a united front to put all this unpleasantness behind us. Unpleasantness? Quentin repeated, an incredulous look on his face. You mean the fact that I'm trying to run my own company without my father's constant interference? I mean the fact that you're making a fool of yourself, she shot back, her silken voice finally showing a hint of steel. This architect. She's a phase, a dalliance, a cute little project. But it's time to get back to the real world. Friday night. Be ready at 8. With that, she turned and swept out of the office, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and toxic condescension in her wake. The silence she left behind was heavy and ugly. I am so sorry, Quentin said, his voice a low, frustrated growl. He looked at Amanda, his eyes full of a helpless, angry apology. She's always been like that. She's awful, Amanda said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and a hurt she didn't want to admit. And she's your, what? Your arrangement? She's my father's choice for a daughter-in-law, he said, the words tasting like poison. It's been his project since we were kids, a merger of two powerful families. It has nothing to do with me, or what I want. And what do you want, Quentin? She asked, her voice a raw whisper, the question hanging in the air between them, desperate and real. He looked at her flushed cheeks, her defiant eyes at the woman who had just called him out, stood up to him, and then, without hesitation, stood with him. I want a life, he said, his voice full of a sincerity that made her heart ache. A real one, with a classic rock soundtrack and a whole lot of bees. He took a step towards her, and her breath hitched. The world, which had been spinning out of control just moments before, suddenly came to a sharp, brilliant focus. But the image of Veronica, so cool, so confident, so belonging in his world, was still burned into her mind. She's going to be at that gala, Amanda said, thinking out loud, and you're supposed to be with her. I'm not going, he said immediately. No, she said, a slow, dangerous, and utterly insane idea beginning to form in her mind. No, you are going, but you're not going with her. She looked up at him, a brilliant, wicked, and terrified smile spreading across her face. You're going with me. Quentin stared at her as if she had just announced she was going to juggle flaming torches. Go with you? He repeated, his brain struggling to process the sheer, audacious insanity of her proposal. To my father's gala? The single most important, high-stakes, shark-infested social event of the year? Amanda, that's not a plan. That's a declaration of war. Exactly, she said, a brilliant, reckless fire in her eyes. Your father, Veronica, they think they can just dismiss me. They think I'm the help. They think I'm a phase. They want to put you in a box and me in the gutter. I say we don't let them. They will eat you alive, he said, the words a low, grim warning. You have no idea what these people are like. It's a blood sport. They smile in your face while they're sharpening the knives behind your back. Then I guess I'd better bring a bigger knife, she countered, her chin held high. I'm not afraid of them, Quentin, but I'm starting to think you are. The challenge, so bold and so direct, hung in the air between them. He looked at her, at the fierce, unshakable courage in her eyes, and he felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. She wasn't just his partner in a project. She was his partner in a rebellion. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. Okay, he said, the word a surrender and a promise. Okay, architect, let's go to war. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. If Amanda was going to walk into the lion's den, she was going to do it dressed for battle. But her battle armor wasn't going to be a couture gown bought with Quentin's money. That would be playing their game, by their rules. She was going to do this her way. She spent every spare moment in her small, cluttered studio, not at her drafting table, but at her sewing machine. Years ago, before she had focused on architecture, she had been a passionate, talented dressmaker. It was a skill she hadn't used in years, a part of herself she had packed away. Now, she was unearthing it. She found a bolt of deep emerald green silk she had bought years ago and never had the courage to use. It was a bold, unapologetic color, the color of life, of growth, of bees. With a determined, focused intensity, she began to design. The dress wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a statement. It was a manifesto in silk. Quentin, for his part, was engaged in his own form of warfare. He was on the phone constantly, not with his father or the board, but with a network of contacts he hadn't used in years. He was pulling strings, calling in favors, and setting the stage. He was no longer reacting to his father's moves. He was setting a trap of his own. He only saw glimpses of her design. A flash of green silk, the intricate sketch on her notepad. She was keeping the final product a secret, even from him. Are you sure about this, Amanda? He asked her one night, as he found her hunched over her sewing machine, her face illuminated by the small lamp, pins held between her lips. I can just buy you a dress, the best dress money can buy. No, she said, not looking up from her work. That would make me your guest, your plus one. She finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with a fierce creative pride. This makes me your equal. On the night of the gala, Quentin arrived at her apartment to pick her up. He was wearing a classic, devastatingly sharp tuxedo, but there was a nervous, anxious energy buzzing just beneath the surface. He paced her small living room, checking his watch every 10 seconds. She's going to be there, he said, thinking out loud. Veronica and my father. They're going to come at you with everything they have. "Let them," a voice said from the bedroom doorway. He turned, and for the second time in his life, Amanda Thomas made the world stop. She was a vision in emerald green. The dress was a masterpiece. It was elegant and sophisticated, with a clean architectural silhouette that hugged her curves in all the right places. But it was the details that took his breath away. Subtly, almost secretly, woven into the fabric of the skirt were tiny, exquisitely embroidered golden bees. They weren't just decorative, they were a part of the design, a secret language that only the two of them understood. She had done more than make a dress, she had weaponized her art. "Wow," he breathed, his voice full of a raw, undisguised awe. "You, Amanda, you look ready for battle?" She finished for him, a small, confident smile on her face. "Like you've already won," he corrected. He held out his arm, and as she took it, he felt a surge of pride so powerful it almost knocked him over. He wasn't escorting his employee to a party. He was walking into a war zone with his queen. The gala was exactly the kind of glittering, soul-crushing spectacle Amanda had imagined. It was held in a massive, opulent ballroom, dripping with crystals and filled with the low, predatory murmur of the city's elite. It was a sea of black tuxedos and designer gowns, a uniform of wealth and power. When they walked in, a hush fell over the room. Every head turned. It wasn't just because of Quentin, the rebel heir making his grand return to society. It was because of her. She didn't look like a guest. She didn't look like a plus one. In her bold, self-made gown, surrounded by a sea of generic couture, she looked like an artist. An original. They immediately spotted them holding court near the grand staircase. Elias Aberdeen, a hawk in a tuxedo, and Veronica, a viper in diamonds. They were watching them, their faces a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Okay," Quentin murmured, his hand tightening on hers. "Showtime." But before they could take another step, they were intercepted. A woman with a sharp, intelligent face and a microphone appeared in front of them, a cameraman in tow. It was Sarah Jenkins. "Mr. Aberdeen," she said, her voice smooth and professional. "A surprise to see you here. And you've brought Miss Thomas. A bold move." "Amanda is the lead architect on my company's most important project," Quentin said, his voice calm and steady. "It's only fitting that she be here." Sarah's eyes flicked to Amanda, taking in the dress, the confident posture, the tiny embroidered bees. A flicker of understanding and respect lit up her eyes. "Miss Thomas," she said, "your dress is a work of art, a statement." "I believe good design should always tell a story," Amanda replied, her voice clear and unwavering. "And what story is this dress telling?" Sarah asked, a shrewd smile on her face. Amanda looked past Sarah, her gaze locking for a brief, electrifying moment with Elias and Veronica across the room. "It's telling the story of a project that some people thought was an indulgence," she said, her voice ringing with a quiet, defiant pride. "A story about sustainability and community and the radical idea that a building should give back more than it takes. It's a story about bees." A ripple of intrigued murmurs went through the crowd that had gathered around them. Sarah Jenkins just smiled, a slow, appreciative smile. She knew a good story when she saw one. Before she could ask another question, Quentin gently steered Amanda away. "That was your opening salvo," he whispered, a note of admiration in his voice. "Just warming up," she whispered back. They spent the next hour navigating the treacherous waters of the gala. It was a masterclass in social warfare. People would approach them, their smiles wide, their eyes sharp, fishing for gossip. Quentin, with a grace and charm Amanda had never seen, would deflect their questions, turning every conversation back to the Aberdeen Tower project, and more specifically, to Amanda's brilliant, innovative design. He wasn't just her date. He was her publicist. Finally, the inevitable happened. Elias and Veronica descended upon them, their faces a mask of polite, glacial fury. "Sebastian," Elias said, his voice a low growl, for Quentin's ears only. "This little stunt is beneath you. Send the girl home." "Amanda is my partner, father," Quentin said, his voice equally quiet but firm as steel. "She's not going anywhere." Veronica stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Amanda, a cruel, condescending smile on her face. "That's a very creative dress, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Did you make it yourself?" "I did," Amanda replied, her own smile just as sweet and 1,000 times more dangerous. "I find it so much more rewarding to build something of my own, rather than just inheriting it." The perfectly aimed shot hit its mark. Veronica's smile faltered, a flash of pure, unadulterated fury in her eyes. "And those little bugs," she continued, gesturing to the embroidered bees. "How whimsical. Are you that fond of insects?" "I'm fond of ecosystems," Amanda said calmly, "and the idea that even the smallest creature has a vital role to play. A concept that some people," she added, her gaze flicking pointedly to Veronica, "might find difficult to understand." It was a verbal duel, a battle of wits fought with silken words and venomous smiles, and Amanda was winning. She wasn't just holding her own, she was dominating. She was using her intelligence, her wit, the very things that made her her, as weapons. And Veronica, who had only ever known how to fight with money and status, was completely outmatched. Just then, the orchestra began to play, and the host of the evening, the mayor, took to the stage. It was time for the keynote address. The moment the most important donor of the evening would be honored. "And now," the mayor announced, "it is my great honor to introduce the man whose family's unprecedented generosity has made our new cardiac wing possible. A man who has always been a pillar of this community, Mr. Elias Aberdeen." A polite, lukewarm round of applause went through the room. Elias walked to the stage, a picture of smug, self-satisfied philanthropy. He began his speech, a dry, self-congratulatory monologue about civic duty and the importance of giving back. Amanda could feel Quentin tense beside her, his body rigid with a lifetime of suppressed resentment. And then Elias said the one thing that changed everything. "And while the Aberdeen Corporation will always be a leader in our community," he said, his gaze sweeping the room and landing, for a brief pointed moment, on Quentin, "it is the Aberdeen family that is its heart. A family that understands the importance of tradition, of legacy, and of stability." It was a public slap in the face. A declaration that Quentin, the rebel, the agent of chaos, was no longer a part of that legacy. Amanda watched Quentin's face. She saw the flash of pain in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw. And in that moment, she knew her little war wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to win the battle of wits. She had to win the war of hearts. She looked at the stage, at the powerful, untouchable man bathed in the spotlight. And then she looked at Quentin, at the good, decent man standing in the shadows. And she made a decision. A crazy, reckless, career-ending, and absolutely necessary decision. She squeezed his hand, a silent signal. And then she let go and started walking. Not away, but towards the stage. A hush fell over the crowd as they watched her, a lone figure in emerald green, walking with a calm, deliberate purpose towards the most powerful man in the city. She didn't look angry. She looked determined. She reached the small set of stairs at the side of the stage and walked up them, stopping just a few feet from Elias Aberdeen, who had faltered mid-sentence, his face a mask of pure, stunned disbelief. "Excuse me," Amanda said, her voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. "Mr. Aberdeen, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you were talking about legacy, and I just wanted to say, you're right, it is the most important thing." She turned to face the crowd, a sea of shocked, intrigued faces. "My name is Amanda Thomas," she said, "and I am the lead architect of the new Aberdeen Tower. For the past few months, I have had the privilege of working with a man who has taught me more about legacy than anyone I have ever met. A man who believes that a legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you build." She looked back at Quentin, who was standing in the crowd, his face pale with shock, his eyes locked with hers. "He taught me that a building can be more than just steel and glass," she continued, her voice ringing with a passion that was so real, so genuine, it was impossible to ignore. "That it can have a soul, that it can give back to the city it's a part of. He is the man who championed the public art gallery. He is the man who fought for the sustainable green design. He is the man," she said, her voice breaking slightly, "who insisted on the beehive." A ripple of laughter and applause went through the room. "He is a new kind of leader," she said, her gaze returning to the stunned crowd. "A leader who understands that the true measure of a legacy isn't the height of the towers you build, but the strength of the communities you foster. His name is Quentin Aberdeen, and he is the future." With that, she gave a small, polite nod to the speechless Elias Aberdeen, turned, and walked off the stage, leaving a mushroom cloud of stunned, electrifying silence in her wake. She had done more than hijack a speech. She had staged a public coronation. And she had done it right in the heart of the king's own castle. Amanda didn't wait for the applause. She didn't wait for the reaction. The moment she stepped off the stage, she just kept walking, a woman on a mission. Adrenaline was singing in her veins. She had just committed career suicide or staged a brilliant corporate coup, and she wasn't entirely sure which. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that room, under the weight of all those judging eyes, for a second longer. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring the shocked whispers and the intrigued stares. She just needed air. She needed a quiet corner where she could process the sheer glorious insanity of what she had just done. She found herself on a secluded outdoor terrace, the cool night air a welcome shock after the stuffy ballroom. The distant, muted sounds of the gala seemed a world away. She walked to the stone balustrade and leaned against it, her heart still hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Well," she whispered to the silent, glittering city skyline, "that's one way to make a first impression." It was more of a revolution. She spun around. Quentin was standing there in the shadows of the terrace doorway, his face a mask of sheer, dumbfounded awe. He walked slowly towards her, his eyes never leaving hers. "Amanda," he said, his voice a raw, incredulous whisper. What was that?" "I don't know," she admitted, a shaky, hysterical laugh escaping her lips. "I think I might have just publicly declared you the new king. Or possibly just declared myself insane. The jury's still out." He stopped in front of her, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. "You just stood up to my father in front of his entire world, and you didn't just defend me. You anointed me. You told them a story about a man I wasn't even sure I was capable of being." "I told them the truth," she said, her voice softening. "I told them about the man I've been working with, the man who knows about HVAC systems and classic rock albums, the man who sees the bigger picture, the man who believes in bees." He just stared at her, and in his eyes she saw a universe of emotions swirling. Gratitude, admiration, and something deeper, something so powerful it stole her breath. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, just as he had in his office. But this time there was no hesitation, no fear, only a raw, undeniable certainty. "You are the most incredible, terrifying, and brilliant woman I have ever met," he murmured, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "Is that your official CEO assessment?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "That's my official Quentin assessment," he replied, his voice a low, intimate rumble. "And my assessment is that I am completely, irrevocably in love with you." And then he kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of absolute, world-altering certainty. It was a kiss that tasted of champagne and cool night air and the electrifying thrill of a shared rebellion. It was the kiss of a king who had just been handed his crown, not by birthright, but by the one person in the world who truly saw him. When they finally pulled apart, they just rested their foreheads together, their breath mingling in the cool air. The silence between them was no longer tense or uncertain. It was full. It was peaceful. "So," she said, her voice a little shaky, "what happens now?" He let out a low, happy laugh, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. "Now," he said, his eyes sparkling with a new, confident light, "I go and claim my kingdom." He took her hand, his grip warm and firm. But a king is nothing without his queen. Before she could even process the sheer, heart-stopping romance of that statement, the doors to the terrace burst open. It was Veronica, her beautiful face a mask of pure, venomous rage, and behind her Elias Aberdeen, his expression colder and more dangerous than Amanda had ever seen. Well, Veronica purred, her voice dripping with poison. "The touching little speech is over, and here you are, cavorting with the help, again." "She's not the help, Veronica," Quentin said, his voice calm and steady as he stepped in front of Amanda, a human shield. "She's my partner." "She's a nobody." Elias Aberdeen finally spoke, his voice a low, thunderous growl. "An idealistic, naive little girl who has filled your head with nonsense about bees and communities. You have embarrassed me, Sebastian. You have embarrassed our family. You have made a mockery of our legacy." "No, father," Quentin said, his voice ringing with a new, unshakable authority. "She has reminded me what our legacy is supposed to be about. It's not just about building towers, it's about building a future." "A future you seem to have forgotten." "This is not the future," Elias spat, gesturing dismissively at Amanda. "This is a dalliance, a temporary insanity. You will end it. Now. You will come back to your family. You will take your place beside Veronica, and we will put this whole embarrassing episode behind us." "No," Quentin said, the words simple, clear, and final. "I won't. I'm done living in your shadow, Father. I'm done playing by your rules. I'm choosing my own future. And my future," he said, reaching back and taking Amanda's hand, pulling her to his side, "is with her." Elias stared at them, at their joined hands, at the united, defiant front they presented, and in his cold, calculating eyes, Amanda saw something she hadn't expected, a flicker of fear. He wasn't just losing control of his son, he was losing control of his empire. The story she had told on that stage hadn't just been a beautiful speech, it had been a shift in power. The board members, the investors, the press, they had all heard it. They had all seen the new king and his new queen. "You will regret this, boy," Elias said, his voice a low, threatening whisper. "I will not be usurped. I will not be replaced. I will destroy you, and I will start with her." With that, he turned and stormed away, a titan of industry, beginning to crumble under the weight of his own obsolescence. Veronica lingered for a moment, her eyes, filled with a pure, undiluted hatred, fixed on Amanda. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You may have won the battle, but I will win the war." Then she too was gone, a phantom of a future that had just been erased. The terrace was quiet again. The threats hung in the air, ugly and real. But Amanda wasn't scared. She looked at Quentin, at the strong, confident man standing beside her, and she felt a sense of peace so profound, it was almost overwhelming. "So," she said, a small, tired smile on her face, "it seems we've officially declared war on your entire family." "It seems we have," he said, his own smile matching hers. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, "And I've never been more certain that I'm on the winning side." They walked back into the gala, hand in hand, no longer a secret, but a statement. The mood in the room had shifted entirely. The polite, deferential whispers that had followed Elias were gone, replaced by a buzz of excited, intrigued energy directed at them. They were the new center of this universe. The future. People who had ignored Amanda just an hour before were now flocking to her, eager to talk about her vision, her brilliant speech. She handled them with a grace and a wit that made Quentin's heart swell with pride. Later that night, as he was driving her home, the adrenaline of the evening finally began to fade, leaving a comfortable, happy exhaustion in its place. "You were incredible tonight," he said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "You faced down a dragon, a viper, and a room full of sharks, and you didn't even flinch." "I was terrified," she admitted, a small, shaky laugh escaping her lips. "My knees were knocking the entire time I was on that stage." "I couldn't tell," he said. "All I could see was a queen." She was quiet for a long moment as they drove through the sleeping city. "Quentin," she said, her voice small. "Your father, he meant what he said, didn't he? He's going to come after us." He reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "Let him try," he said, his voice a low, confident rumble. "He's playing an old game with old rules. We're not. He's trying to protect a dying kingdom. We're building a new one." He looked over at her, his face illuminated by the passing streetlights. "And our kingdom has bees." She laughed, a real, happy, hopeful laugh that filled the small car. He was right. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, she wasn't just fighting for a building, she was fighting for a future. Their future. And she knew, with a certainty that was as real and as solid as the city around them, that it was a future worth fighting for. The aftermath of the gala was not the explosion Elias Aberdeen had likely anticipated. It was something far more dangerous, a quiet, seismic shift. Amanda's speech, amplified by Sarah Jenkins and a dozen other news outlets, had changed the narrative. Quentin was no longer the rebellious son making a foolish mistake. He was the visionary leader, the future. And Amanda wasn't the help. She was the architect of that future, the brilliant mind behind the new Aberdeen philosophy. The war Elias had threatened was not a war of corporate takeovers or public scandals. It was a cold war, fought in the silent, unforgiving battlegrounds of the boardroom and the stock market. He began a systematic campaign to undermine Quentin's new leadership. He used his remaining influence on the board to question every decision, to delay every approval. He leaked minor, negative stories to friendly financial bloggers, creating a subtle but persistent narrative of instability. For Amanda and Quentin, The weeks that followed were a grueling test of their new partnership. Their life was no longer about late-night design sessions and shared takeout. It was about strategy meetings and damage control and the constant, exhausting pressure of fighting a ghost. One afternoon, Amanda was in Quentin's office, which now felt more like her own, with her sketches and material samples covering every available surface. When Jonathan walked in, his face grimmer than usual. "It's the zoning commission," he said, his voice low. "They've flagged the rooftop garden, citing a new obscure regulation about non-essential rooftop structures in the downtown commercial district. They're putting a hold on the permit." "A new regulation?" Amanda said, a sinking feeling in her stomach. "That's impossible. We had full approval." "The regulation was passed by a city council subcommittee last Tuesday," Jonathan explained. "A subcommittee chaired by a man named Robert Vance. A man who has been on my father's payroll for the past 15 years, Quentin finished, his voice a low, angry growl. He was standing by the window, looking down at the city, at the kingdom his father was trying to poison from the inside out. "He's killing the bees," Amanda whispered, the words a quiet, heartbroken realization. The beehive, the symbol of their new philosophy, the heart of her design, it was the first thing he had targeted. "It's more than that," Quentin said, turning from the window. "This isn't just about the garden. It's a delay tactic. Every day the project is stalled, our investors get more nervous. He's not trying to win, he's just trying to make us bleed." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure, frustrated exhaustion. "We can fight it, of course. We can appeal, but it will take months. Months we don't have." Amanda looked at the beautiful sun-drenched rendering of her rooftop garden. She looked at Quentin, at the weary, defeated look in his eyes, a look she had never seen before. And she felt a surge of pure, unadulterated fury. "No," she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "No, we are not going to play his game. We are not going to fight him in a committee meeting." She walked over to her drafting table and began to sketch, her movements sharp and furious. "He wants to kill the bees? Fine, we'll give them a new home." Quentin and Jonathan watched, mesmerized, as she sketched with a fierce, inspired energy. She wasn't just drawing, she was inventing. She was fighting back, not with lawyers or appeals, but with the one weapon her father-in-law would never see coming, a better idea. "If we can't build up," she said, her charcoal pencil flying across the page, "then we'll build in." She tore the sketch from the pad and held it up. It was a cross-section of the building's grand, open-air foyer, but it was different. She had added a massive, multi-story, glass-enclosed atrium, stretching up through the center of the building like a living, breathing lung. And inside it, a vertical garden, a waterfall, and at the very top, bathed in sunlight from a new skylight, a glass-enclosed apiary. "A beehive. We'll turn the entire foyer into a complete ecosystem," she declared, her eyes blazing. "We'll bring the garden inside. We'll make it the heart of the building. Let's see his cronies on the zoning commission try to pass a regulation against essential indoor air quality improvement structures." Quentin stared at the sketch, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. She hadn't just solved the problem. She had transformed it. She had taken his father's attack and turned it into an opportunity to make the building even more innovative, more audacious, more her. "It's insane," he breathed, a note of pure awe in his voice. "It's structurally impossible, a logistical nightmare, and it will cost a fortune." "So you love it," she said, her own smile matching his. "I love it," he confirmed. "Jonathan," he said, turning to his assistant, who was looking at the sketch with a look of terrified admiration. "Get the structural engineering team in here, now, and get me a new budget projection. I want to know how much it costs to build a revolution indoors." The war had changed. Elias was fighting a battle of attrition, a slow, grinding war of paperwork and bureaucracy. But Amanda and Quentin were now fighting a war of innovation, a fast, fluid battle of ideas. For every obstacle Elias threw in their path, Amanda would devise a brilliant, creative solution that didn't just solve the problem, but made the project even better. He tried to block their steel imports with a manufactured trade dispute. She found a new, local supplier of a revolutionary, lightweight, carbon fiber composite that made the building stronger and more sustainable. He used his influence to drive up the price of the Italian marble she wanted for the floors. She sourced a stunning and far more interesting, reclaimed slate from a defunct quarry in upstate New York. With every move, she was not only outsmarting him, she was refining the very philosophy of the building, making it more local, more sustainable, more deeply connected to the community it was a part of. She was turning his poison into her medicine. But the constant fighting was taking its toll. The long hours, the relentless pressure, the knowledge that Quentin's father was using every ounce of his power to try and destroy them, began to wear on them. The easy, playful banter that had defined their relationship was replaced by the clipped, efficient shorthand of two soldiers in a trench. One night, Amanda was working late, as usual, trying to solve a complex electrical grid issue created by her new atrium design. She was exhausted, her eyes burning from staring at the blueprints for too long. Quentin walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He looked just as tired as she felt. "Any luck?" he asked, his voice a low, weary rumble. "No," she said with a sigh, rubbing her temples. "I'm a ghost hunter, remember? Not an electrical engineer. I'm in over my head." "No, you're not," he said, sitting on the edge of her desk. He was quiet for a long moment, just watching her. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "I was thinking about that first day, in the coffee shop. You were so full of passion and fire and bees. You were so angry about the spreadsheet specter, the man you thought was trying to strip the soul out of your work." He looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, painful sadness. "I'm becoming that man, aren't I?" The question, so honest and so vulnerable, hit her like a physical blow. She looked at him, really looked at him, and she saw the toll the war was taking. The dark circles under his eyes, the tense line of his jaw. The joyful, rebellious king from the gala was gone, replaced by a tired, embattled soldier. "No," she said, her own voice a fierce, protective whisper. "You are not him. You will never be him." "Then what are we doing, Amanda?" he asked, his voice full of a desperate, weary frustration. "We're fighting, and we're winning, but we're letting him set the terms. We're living in his world, a world of battles and strategies and constant, exhausting war. This isn't the life I wanted, for either of us." He was right. They had been so focused on fighting the war, they had forgotten why they were fighting it in the first place. "So what do we do?" she asked, her own exhaustion mirroring his. "We can't just surrender. He'll destroy everything we've built." He was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant. "No," he said, a new, strange, and terrifyingly calm resolve in his voice. "We don't surrender. We don't fight. We leave the battlefield." "What are you talking about?" she asked, a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering, sprawling city, his kingdom. "My father's power," he said, thinking out loud, "it comes from this, from the company, from the name, from the empire. He's been trying to pull me back into it, and I've been fighting to stay out. But what if I just let it go?" He turned to face her, and his eyes were full of a light she had never seen before. A light of pure, terrifying freedom. "What if I resign? What if I walk away from Aberdeen Corporation for good? I'll sell my shares, I'll give up the name, I'll abdicate, for real this time." The idea was so radical, so utterly world-shattering, she could barely process it. "But the project," she stammered. "The tower. Everything we've been fighting for." "The tower is just a building," he said, walking towards her. "A beautiful, brilliant building, but it's still his. It has his name on it. It's on his land. We've been trying to build our future on his territory. That's why he can keep attacking us. It's time to find our own ground." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "I don't need an empire, Amanda. I just need a partner. Let him have his tower. Let him have his cold, empty kingdom." He looked her right in the eye, his voice full of a sincere, heartfelt promise. "Let's go build our own." The decision to abdicate a throne is surprisingly administrative. There are no trumpets, no town criers, no ceremonial removing of a crown. There is just a blinking cursor on a blank email screen and a very expensive ergonomic chair that suddenly feels incredibly uncomfortable. Quentin sat at his desk, staring at the empty to field. The subject line simply read, "Resignation." "Is it too informal?" he asked, hovering his finger over the send button. "Should I use a serif font?" Serifs imply gravity. Amanda, who was sitting on the edge of his desk eating a bagel she had smuggled past the security checkpoint, laughed. "Quentin, You are quitting a multi-billion-dollar empire. You could write it in Comic Sans and sign it with a smiley face, and it would still cause a stock market fluctuation. Just hit send. I'm trying to be respectful, he muttered, adjusting his tie. It was a nervous tic she had come to recognize. The Phantom was nervous about becoming human. You're being procrastinatory, she corrected, inventing a word. Look, keep it simple. Effective immediately, I resign. Good luck with the synergy. Sincerely, the guy who likes bees. He looked at her, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I think the legal department might take issue with the lack of specific clauses. Screw the clauses, she said, hopping off the desk. She walked around to his side of the chair and placed her hands over his on the keyboard. Her skin was warm against his cool, air-conditioned hands. Do it. Rip the bandage off. The longer you stare at it, the more reasons you'll find to stay. And we both know there's nothing left for you here. She was right. The tower, once a symbol of ambition, was now just a cage with a great view. He took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of her vanilla shampoo and the stale, recycled air of the office one last time. Okay, he whispered. Together, they pressed the enter key. The message whooshed away into the digital ether, landing in the inboxes of the board of directors, the legal team, and of course, Elias Aberdeen. For a second, nothing happened. The world didn't end. The building didn't collapse. Well, Quentin said, leaning back in his chair, a strange, weightless feeling spreading through his chest. That's done. I am officially unemployed. Correction, Amanda said, grinning. You are officially a freelance disruptor. It's much trendier. Right, freelance disruptor? He tested the words. Does that come with dental? No, she said cheerfully, but the dress code is significantly more relaxed. They spent the next hour packing. Quentin realized, with a pang of sadness, how little of him was actually in this office. A few photos, a pen set he liked, and the plastic chameleon Amanda had won for him at the street fair. Everything else, the awards, the heavy crystal paperweights, the leather-bound books, belonged to the CEO, not to Quentin. He put the chameleon in his pocket. Ready? He asked. One last thing, Amanda said. She walked over to the corner of the room where the large architectural model of the tower stood. The one with the atrium, the vertical garden, and the tiny, model beehive. She reached out and carefully detached the beehive section from the model. We're taking the bees, she stated firmly. They're intellectual property, and they're the soul of the project. We can't leave them here with Gregory. He'll try to fumigate them. Quentin laughed, taking the small plastic structure from her. You're stealing company property on my last day? I'm liberating hostages, she corrected. Let's go. They walked out of the office, past the empty desk of the secretary, who was likely on a break or melting somewhere, and towards the elevators. But as the steel doors slid open, they revealed the one person Quentin had hoped to avoid until he was safely in another zip code. Elias Aberdeen. He stood in the elevator car, looking like a thundercloud trapped in a bespoke suit. He stepped out, blocking their path, his eyes flicking from the box in Quentin's hands to Amanda, and finally settling on his son's face. He clearly hadn't checked his email yet, but he sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Predators always sense when the prey stops running. Going somewhere? Elias asked, his voice a low, suspicious rumble. Actually, yes, Quentin said, his voice surprisingly steady. He didn't step back. He didn't flinch. I just sent the email, Father. I've resigned. Elias stared at him. For a long, terrifying moment, he didn't blink. The silence stretched, thin and brittle as glass. Resigned, Elias repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. You can't resign. You are Aberdeen. This company is your birthright. It is your duty. It's your legacy, Father, Quentin said gently. Not mine. I tried to make it mine. I tried to change it, to make it something alive. But you don't want it to be alive. You want it to be a monument, and I'm done being the caretaker of a mausoleum. This is madness, Elias hissed, his face reddening. He pointed a shaking finger at Amanda. It's her, isn't it? She's poisoned you against your own family. She's convinced you that you can just walk away. She didn't poison me, Quentin said, stepping closer to Amanda, his shoulder brushing hers. She woke me up, and yes, I can just walk away. That's the terrifying, wonderful thing about freedom, Father. You don't need permission to take it. You will have nothing, Elias roared, his composure finally cracking. The mask of the Titan slipped, revealing a frightened, angry old man. "I will freeze your trust. I will block your access to the family accounts. You will walk out of here with nothing but the clothes on your back. Do you understand? You will be a nobody." Quentin looked at his father, really looked at him. He saw the fear behind the rage, the fear of losing control, the fear of being irrelevant. "I know," Quentin said softly. "I'm counting on it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his security badge, the black, limitless access card that opened every door in the Empire. He held it out. "Here," Quentin said. "You can have the keys back. I won't be needing them where I'm going." Elias didn't take the card. He just stared at it, as if it were a grenade. So Quentin placed it gently on the small table by the elevator bank. "Goodbye, Father," he said. "Come on, Quentin," Amanda said, her voice soft but firm. She took his hand. "Let's go. The bees are waiting." They stepped around the frozen figure of Elias Aberdeen and into the waiting elevator. As the doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the angry, lonely king in his tower, Quentin let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 10 years. The descent to the lobby felt different this time. It wasn't a plunge, it was a release. When they stepped out onto the busy sidewalk, the noise of the city hit them. Sirens, car horns, the chatter of 1,000 people. To Quentin, it sounded like a symphony. A classic rock symphony. "Okay," Amanda said, blinking in the bright sunlight. "We did it. You're free." And broke. Well, billionaire broke, which is probably still better than my kind of broke, but still. Effectively liquid asset challenged. "I have my personal savings," Quentin said, adjusting the box in his arms, "and I have a very nice watch I can pawn if things get desperate." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," she laughed. "So, partner, what's the first move? We have no office, no staff, and our only asset is a plastic model of a beehive." "First move," Quentin said, his stomach giving a loud, undignified grumble, "is lunch, but not at the Pierre. I want a hot dog from a cart with everything on it." "A street meat initiation?" Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Bold choice. Are you sure your refined digestive system can handle it?" "I'm a disruptor now," he said with a grin. "I have a cast iron stomach." They found a cart on the corner. Quentin ordered 2 hot dogs with mustard, sauerkraut, and those questionable onions in the red sauce. He paid with cash, fumbling slightly with the bills, a skill he hadn't used in years. They sat on a bench in a small, concrete park surrounded by pigeons and office workers on their lunch break. Quentin took a bite of his hot dog. Mustard squirted onto his chin. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, laughing. "This is terrible," he declared happily. "I love it." "Welcome to the real world," Amanda said, munching on hers. "It's messy, it's chaotic, and it usually gives you heartburn. But the company is better." "Much better," he agreed, looking at her. The sunlight caught the stray strands of hair escaping her bun. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright with excitement. "So," he said, shifting gears, "we need a headquarters. If we're going to build a new kind of firm, we can't do it from my living room. It's too sterile. And your apartment is too full of fabric scraps." "Hey, those scraps are inventory," she defended. "But you're right. We need a space. Something gritty. Something with potential. Something that needs us to fix it." "I might know a place," he said slowly. "It's not listed. It's actually a property my grandfather bought back in the 50s. A small warehouse in the meatpacking district. My father forgot about it years ago because it wasn't generating enough revenue to appear on his precious spreadsheets. It's been sitting empty for a decade." "A forgotten warehouse?" Amanda's architect eyes lit up. "Quentin, that's not a workspace. That's a dream project." "It's probably full of rats," he warned. "Rats are just uninvited tenants," she dismissed. "Let's go see it." An hour later, they were standing in front of a rusted, graffiti-covered rolling door on a cobblestone street. The building was brick, old and weathered, with ivy climbing up the sides like a green beard. It looked abandoned, forgotten, and utterly unloved. "It's rustic," Quentin said, trying to manage expectations. "It's perfect," Amanda breathed. Quentin found the old key on his keychain. He had kept it as a sentimental memento of his grandfather, a reminder of the man who started it all with a wrench and a dream. He struggled with the rusty lock for a moment before it clicked open. He heaved the heavy metal door up. It groaned and screeched, a sound of protest from a building that hadn't been woken up in years. Sunlight flooded into the space, dancing with dust motes that swirled in the air. It was a mess. There were piles of old crates, tarps covering mysterious shapes, and yes, definitely a few signs of rodent activity. But the bones were magnificent. Exposed brick walls, high timber beams, massive industrial windows that once cleaned would let in floods of natural light. "Oh wow," Amanda whispered, walking into the center of the cavernous space. Her voice echoed, "Quentin, look at the light, look at the texture. We can put the drafting tables there by the north windows, a meeting area here with the vintage sofas. And look up." She pointed to the rafters. "We can hang lights, maybe even put in a mezzanine." She was already designing, her hands moving in the air, shaping the empty space into a home. Quentin watched her, a lump forming in his throat. He had spent his life in glass towers that felt like tombs. This dusty, dirty, empty box felt more alive than Aberdeen Tower ever had. "And the bees?" he asked, holding up the plastic model. "The roof," she said immediately. "Flat access, south-facing, perfect for a real apiary. Will be the only architectural firm in New York that produces its own honey." Thomas and Aberdeen, he mused, testing the sound of it. Sustainable design and honey? "We'll workshop the name," she laughed. She turned to him, her face glowing. "But we can do this, Quentin. We can really do this. No board of directors, no quarterly reports, just us. Building things that matter. Just us," he repeated. He set the plastic beehive down on an old wooden crate. It was the first piece of furniture in their new empire. He looked around the empty warehouse. It was daunting. They had no clients, limited funds, and a massive renovation ahead of them. They were going to have to scrub floors, paint walls, and probably learn how to exterminate rats. It was going to be hard work. Unimaginably hard work. And he couldn't wait to start. "Okay, partner," he said, rolling up the sleeves of his expensive dress shirt. "Where do we begin?" "We begin," she said, picking up a dusty broom from the corner, "by clearing out the cobwebs, literally and metaphorically." She tossed him the broom. "You're up, CEO. Show me those basement cleaning skills." He caught the broom. "You know," he said, looking at the dirty bristles, "I used to have people for this." "Now you have a partner," she said, picking up a piece of scrap wood to use as a shovel. "And she expects you to pull your weight." He smiled, a genuine, sweaty, dusty smile. "Yes, ma'am." He started sweeping. The dust rose in clouds, making him cough, settling on his suit, ruining his polished shoes. He swept with a rhythm, a purpose. With every stroke of the broom, he wasn't just cleaning a floor. He was clearing away the expectations, the pressure, the legacy that had choked him for so long. Amanda joined him, humming a tune under her breath. He recognized it. It wasn't a symphony, it was a classic rock song. "Rolling Stones, Start Me Up." He chuckled, joining in the humming. They spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning, laughing, and planning. They ordered pizza for dinner, again, and ate it sitting on the floor of their empty warehouse, watching the city lights flicker on through the grimy windows. "You know," Quentin said, wiping tomato sauce from his lip, "I think this is the best meal I've ever had." "It's the dust," Amanda said, "adds texture." He looked at her, sitting cross-legged in her emerald green dress, now dusty and smudged, looking like a disheveled queen of the ashes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For the pizza?" "For the rescue," he said. "For pulling me out of the tower. For showing me the side entrance." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers interlacing with his. "You rescued yourself, Quentin. I just held the door open." "Well," he said, leaning in, his eyes full of the future. "Don't ever let it close." He kissed her then. A dusty, pizza-flavored kiss in the middle of a rat-infested warehouse. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was better. It was real. It was the beginning of a story they were writing themselves, one messy, beautiful chapter at a time. "So," she said, pulling back slightly, her eyes dancing. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp, strategy meeting." "I'll be there," he promised. "I'll bring the coffee and the synergy." She groaned. "Don't push your luck, Aberdeen." "Okay," he laughed. "Coffee and bagels, but I'm picking the music." "Deal," she said, "as long as it's not death metal." "Classic rock only," he vowed. Strictly classic rock. Outside, the city of New York bustled on, indifferent to the two people in the old warehouse. But inside, a new hive was forming. A place where things would be built with care, with passion, and with a whole lot of heart. And maybe, just maybe, a few bees. Building an empire from scratch, it turned out, involved significantly more dust than Quentin Aberdeen was used to. It also involved a lot less sleeping, a lot more instant noodles, and a startling amount of negotiation with local raccoons who believed they had squatters' rights to the warehouse basement. 3 months into the great Thomas and Aberdeen experiment, Quentin stood in the middle of their office, which was really just a cleanish corner of the warehouse, with 2 second-hand desks and a very expensive espresso machine he had rescued from his penthouse, and looked at a spreadsheet. "We are," he announced gravely, adjusting his glasses, "technically solvent. Assuming we don't buy any more, what is this line item? Emergency glitter?" Amanda poked her head out from behind a large blueprint she was marking up. Her hair was held back by a chopstick, and she had a smudge of blue ink on her nose. "That was for the presentation to the elementary school board. Kids love glitter, Quentin. It's a proven architectural principle. Sparkle equals engagement." "Right," he said, fighting a smile. "Sparkle. I'll add that to the ledger under critical infrastructure." He looked at her, really looked at her. In the harsh fluorescent light of their makeshift office, surrounded by peeling paint and the distinct smell of old brick, she looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes and her hands were rough from weeks of sanding and painting. But there was a light in her eyes that he had never seen in the glass tower. She was happy, and so was he. He was tired, yes. His back ached from helping move drywall yesterday. His bank account was looking disturbingly human. But he woke up every morning excited. Not stressed, not dreading the day, but genuinely buzzingly excited to come to this drafty, rat-adjacent warehouse and build something real. "So," Amanda said, rolling up the blueprint, "the elementary school project. Did we get it?" Quentin took a deep breath. This was their first real pitch. Not a skyscraper, not a corporate headquarters. A new library annex for a local public school. The budget was tiny, the timeline was impossible, and the client, a committee of 6 overworked teachers and 1 very skeptical principal, was tougher than any board of directors he had ever faced. "They had concerns," he said, keeping his face neutral. "About the glitter?" she asked, worried. "About the timeline," he corrected. "Principal Miller didn't believe we could deliver a net-zero, solar-powered, fate-reading Nook-filled library by September." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her," Quentin said, allowing the grin to finally break through, "that Thomas and Aberdeen specializes in impossible timelines, and that if we miss the deadline, I will personally come in and read The Very Hungry Caterpillar to every single kindergarten class for a year." Amanda laughed, a bright ringing sound that seemed to chase the shadows away from the corners of the warehouse. "You did not." "I did," he confirmed. "It sealed the deal. We got the contract partner." She screamed, a very uncorporate sound, and ran across the room, launching herself into his arms. He caught her, spinning her around, the smell of dust and vanilla filling his senses. "We did it," she cheered into his neck. "We actually have a client. A paying client." "We do," he said, setting her down but not letting go. "It's not exactly the Kurosawa merger. The profit margin is negligible, but it's a start." "It's better than a merger," she said, her eyes shining. "We're building a library, Quentin. We're building a place for stories. That's huge." It was. It felt bigger, heavier, and more important than any 50-story tower he had ever approved. "We should celebrate," he said. "Champagne? Caviar? Pizza," she corrected firmly. "And maybe we can finally assemble those IKEA bookshelves for the conference area without threatening to divorce each other, even though we're not married." "Whoa," he said, feigning offense. "I am a master of the Allen wrench. My spatial awareness is unparalleled." "You put the last shelf on backwards," she reminded him. "That was a design choice," he countered smoothly. "Deconstructivism." They spent the evening assembling furniture, eating pizza on the floor, and listening to the Rolling Stones. It was perfect. It was messy and loud and real. But the real world, the world they had left behind, hadn't vanished completely. It existed on the periphery, a silent, gray ghost. A week later, Quentin was on a ladder, trying to install a light fixture, when the heavy rolling door of the warehouse rattled. "We're not buying anything," Amanda shouted from her desk. "And if you're the raccoons, we've already discussed the terms of your eviction." The small pedestrian door cut into the main gate creaked open. A figure stepped into the dusty shaft of sunlight. It wasn't a raccoon, and it wasn't a salesperson. It was Jonathan. He looked exactly the same. Impeccable suit, perfectly polished shoes, tablet tucked under his arm, but he looked wildly out of place against the backdrop of exposed brick and graffiti. He looked like a time traveler who had taken a wrong turn. "Jonathan," Quentin said, climbing down from the ladder, wiping his dusty hands on his jeans. "To what do we owe the pleasure? Did my father send you to repossess the espresso machine?" "Mr. Aberdeen," Jonathan said with a polite nod. "Miss Thomas, the espresso machine was a gift. I marked it as depreciated office equipment before I left." "Wait," Quentin said, pausing. "Before you left?" Jonathan walked further into the room, looking around the chaotic workspace with an expression that was hard to read. He ran a gloved finger over a rough wooden beam. "Rustic," he commented, "very textural." "Jonathan," Quentin pressed, "what do you mean before you left?" Jonathan turned to face him. "I resigned this morning, sir." Silence filled the warehouse. Jonathan, the loyal lieutenant, the man who was as much a part of Aberdeen Corp as the logo itself, had resigned? "Why?" Amanda asked, stepping forward. "Because the building is quiet," Jonathan said simply. "Without you, sir, and without the creative disruptions of Miss Thomas, the tower is just a silent place full of angry people looking at spreadsheets. The soul has gone out of it." He looked at Quentin. "Your father is struggling. The board is restless. The stock is down 12%. He is trying to rule by fear, but fear is a poor substitute for vision." Quentin felt a pang of something. Not regret, but perhaps pity. His father had won the battle for the company, but he was losing the war for its future. "I'm sorry, Jonathan," Quentin said. "I know how much that company meant to you." "It meant a great deal," Jonathan agreed, "but I find that I am at a stage in my career where I prioritize job satisfaction." And perhaps a tiny, almost invisible smile touched his lips. "A bit of chaos." He tapped his tablet. "I have taken the liberty of drafting a business plan for Thomas and Aberdeen. You have excellent creative instincts, but your operational logistics are appalling. Your filing system appears to be piles on the floor, and I believe you are overpaying for your internet service by 40%. Quentin and Amanda looked at each other, stunned. "Are you saying?" Quentin began. "I am applying for a position," Jonathan said formally. "Director of Operations. I come with my own stapler and a very comprehensive contact list of suppliers who do not charge billionaire tax." "You want to work here?" Amanda asked, gesturing to the dusty, half-renovated space. "Jonathan, we don't have AC yet, and there's a possum named Steve who lives in the loading dock." "I am excellent at negotiating with possums," Jonathan said, unfazed. "Do we have a deal?" Quentin grinned, a wide, boyish grin that made him look 10 years younger. "You're hired, Jonathan. Welcome to the madness." With Jonathan on board, Thomas and Aberdeen transformed from a scrappy experiment into a well-oiled machine. He organized the files, negotiated better rates for materials, and even managed to get Steve the possum relocated to a nice park in Queens. The library project was a massive success. When it opened in September, the kids screamed with joy at the reading nooks built into the walls like honeycombs. The glitter budget was money well spent. But there was one final piece of the puzzle missing, the soul of their new philosophy. The bees. It was a crisp Saturday morning in October. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of weather that made you want to wear thick sweaters and drink hot cider. Quentin and Amanda stood on the flat roof of the warehouse, looking out at the city skyline. In the distance, they could see the sleek, sharp needle of Aberdeen Tower, piercing the sky. It looked cold, lonely. Here on their roof, it was warm. They had spent weeks prepping the space, building planter boxes, planting hardy wildflowers that would bloom even in the city grit. And in the center of it all, raised on a wooden platform they had built together, were 3 white wooden boxes. The apiary. "Are you ready?" Amanda asked. She was wearing a full beekeeper suit, looking like a very cute, very puffy astronaut. Quentin, also suited up, adjusted his mesh veil nervously. "I have faced hostile boards," he muttered. "I have negotiated billion-dollar mergers. I have eaten a street hot dog of questionable origin. Why am I terrified of a box of insects?" "Because you respect them," she said, her voice muffled by the veil. "And because you know that if you drop the queen, I will fire you." "Tough boss," he said. "The toughest," she agreed. The beekeeper they had hired to help with the installation, a calm, bearded man named Lars, handed Quentin a frame covered in buzzing that golden activity. Just hold it steady, Lars said soothingly. They can smell fear and expensive cologne. Good thing you're not wearing any. Quentin held the frame. He felt the vibration of thousands of tiny wings, a hum of pure, concentrated life. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also electric. It was nature, wild and untamable, right here in his hands. He carefully lowered the frame into the hive box. He moved slowly, deliberately, forcing his breathing to slow. He wasn't dominating the situation. He was cooperating with it. Look, Amanda whispered, pointing. A single bee landed on Quentin's gloved hand. It walked around for a moment, checking him out, then took flight, buzzing off towards the newly planted lavender in the corner of the roof. We have liftoff, Quentin breathed. They finished the installation in silence, a reverent, focused work. When the last lid was placed on the hive, they stepped back, stripping off their hoods. The wind ruffled Quentin's hair. He looked at the hives, at the bees already beginning to orient themselves, creating their mental maps of their new home. Then he looked at the city. My father, he said quietly, would hate this. He would say it's a liability, Amanda said, standing beside him, her shoulder pressing against his. An unquantifiable risk. It is, Quentin agreed. It's chaotic, it's messy, it's stinging insects on the roof of a business. He turned to her, his blue eyes clear and bright. It's the best thing I've ever built. We built, she corrected gently. We built, he repeated. He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. You know, Amanda, 6 months ago I was a ghost. I was haunting my own life. I thought success was a number on a spreadsheet. I thought safety was a wall. He looked at the hives again. But you can't get honey without a few stings, and you can't have a life without letting a little bit of the wild in. Is this the part where you tell me I'm your queen bee? She teased, trying to keep the moment light because her heart was so full she thought it might burst. No, he said with a laugh. That's too cheesy, even for me. And besides, queen bees just sit around and lay eggs. You're more like the architect of the hive. I'll take it, she said. He turned to her fully, his expression shifting from playful to something deeper, something that made the rest of the world fall away. I want to build more, Amanda. I want to build libraries and community centers and maybe even a house. A real house, not a penthouse. Something with a garden and a porch, and maybe a dog that Jonathan can spoil. A dog, she asked, her eyebrows raising. We're escalating quickly, from bees to mammals. I'm feeling ambitious, he said softly. I want it all, the chaos, the mess, the noise. I want a life that's so full of stuff that it would give my father a heart attack just looking at the clutter. He squeezed her hand. But mostly, I just want to keep building it with you, partner. Partner, she echoed, the word feeling like a promise, a vow, and a contract all rolled into one. They stood there on the roof, the hum of the city below them and the hum of the bees beside them, suspended in a perfect moment of peace. They had won, not by destroying the old empire, but by simply walking away from it and planting a garden in the ruins. So, Amanda said, breaking the silence after a long, contented moment. Now that we've secured the livestock, what's next on the agenda, Mr. Aberdeen? Quentin checked his watch, a cheap digital one he had bought because it was durable, having sold his luxury timepieces to fund the initial renovation. Well, he said, according to my schedule, it's time for a very important executive meeting. Oh, really? She asked. Boardroom? Roof, he said. Subject, the strategic consumption of leftover pizza and the evaluation of the sunset. Sounds critical, she said. It is, he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, non-negotiable. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no architect could ever hope to replicate, Quentin felt a sense of completion he had never known was possible. He didn't have his billions. He didn't have his tower, but standing there, with dust on his boots, the smell of lavender in the air, and the woman he loved in his arms, he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was finally, truly rich. Hey, Amanda said softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. Look. She pointed to the entrance of one of the hives. A tiny bee was wiggling its way inside, its back legs heavy with yellow pollen. The first harvest. It's working, she whispered. Yeah, Quentin said, kissing the top of her head. It really is. He knew the future wouldn't be easy. There would be lean months and difficult clients, and probably more arguments about classic rock versus silence. But he also knew that whatever came, they would face it together. They had built a fortress, not of stone and steel, but of trust and laughter and a shared vision of a world that was a little bit softer, a little bit wilder, and a whole lot sweeter. And that, he decided, as the first stars began to appear above the city lights, was the only kind of legacy worth leaving. 1 year later, the Thomas and Aberdeen warehouse was no longer a dusty, echoing cavern. It was a hive. A loud, chaotic, brilliantly creative hive. The open-plan office was filled with a team of 6 junior architects, 2 interns who were paid in actual money, a novelty in the industry, and a very serious dog named Blueprint that Jonathan had adopted and trained to carry messages between desks. The air smelled of fresh coffee, sawdust from the workshop in the back, and the faint sweet of honey that wafted down from the roof. Quentin Aberdeen stood on the mezzanine level, looking down at his kingdom. He wasn't wearing a 3-piece suit. He was wearing jeans, a t-shirt that said "Support your local hive," and a pair of boots that had seen better days. He had paint on his elbow. He had never looked more authoritative. "Sir." Jonathan appeared at his side, holding a clipboard. Jonathan was the only person in the building who still wore a full suit, though he had conceded to loosening his tie after 4 p.m. "The quarterly review is ready for your perusal." "Jonathan," Quentin said, leaning on the railing. "We agreed. No more quarterly reviews. We call them vibe checks." "I refuse to use that terminology, sir," Jonathan said stiffly. "It lacks dignity. However, the vibe check indicates that we are profitable. The elementary school library won the Regional Design Award, and the waiting list for our residential renovations is now 6 months long." 6 months. Quentin whistled. "We need more people." "I have already vetted 3 candidates," Jonathan said efficiently. "One of them has a strong opinion on sustainable insulation. I believe Miss Thomas will like her." "You're a machine, Jonathan," Quentin said, clapping him on the shoulder. "I am a director of operations, sir. Efficiency is my love language." Jonathan paused, checking his watch. "Speaking of Miss Thomas, she is currently in the workshop. She requested your presence for a structural integrity test." Quentin grinned. "On my way." He walked down the stairs, high-fiving one of the interns who was carrying a stack of fabric samples. He walked through the bustling office, feeling a hum of energy that no glass tower could ever replicate. This wasn't just a business. It was a community. It was a family. He found Amanda in the workshop, wearing safety goggles and surrounded by wood shavings. She was sanding down a beautiful curved piece of walnut. "Hey," he said, shouting over the noise of the sander. She turned off the machine, pushing her goggles up onto her forehead. Her face was dusted with sawdust, and she looked beautiful. "Hey, partner, ready for the test?" "Always," he said. "What are we testing?" "The load-bearing capacity of the new bookshelf." "No," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "We're testing your ability to tie a tie. We have to leave in an hour." Quentin groaned. "The gullah. I blocked it out." "It's the City Design Awards, Quentin," she reminded him, walking over and brushing some sawdust off his shirt. "We're nominated for the library. It's a big deal." I know, he sighed. "It's just, I haven't worn a tie in a year. I think my neck has forgotten the shape of oppression." "It's just for one night," she promised, kissing his cheek. "And afterwards we can come back here, order pizza and spill sauce on our formal wear. Tradition." "Okay," he said. "For the pizza. I'll do it for the pizza." 2 hours later, they walked into the very same ballroom where, a year ago, Amanda had staged her revolution. But this time, the energy was different. They weren't the outcasts crashing the party. They were the guests of honor. Quentin wore a tuxedo, but he'd skipped the cummerbund, and his hair was a little longer, a little looser. Amanda wore another one of her creations, a stunning midnight blue gown made from recycled silk that shimmered like the night sky. She looked like a rock star. As they moved through the crowd, people didn't look at them with polite disdain. They looked at them with curiosity, with respect. The Thomas and Aberdeen buzz was real. They were the disruptors, the ones who had proven that you could build things with a soul and still succeed. "Look," Amanda whispered, nudging him. Across the room, standing near the bar, was Elias Aberdeen. He looked older, smaller. He was surrounded by a few sycophants, but the crowd had largely moved away from him, drawn to the younger, fresher energy in the room. He looked like a statue in a museum that everyone had already seen. He caught Quentin's eye. For a moment the old tension flared, but then Quentin felt nothing. No anger, no fear, no need to prove anything. He just nodded, a polite acknowledgement of a stranger, and turned back to Amanda. "You okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he said, realizing it was true. "I really am." And the winner of the Civic Design Award, the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, for the public school library annex, is Thomas in Aberdeen. The room erupted in applause. Real, enthusiastic applause. Amanda squeezed his hand so hard he thought his fingers might break. They walked up to the stage together. Amanda took the microphone. She didn't talk about ROI. She didn't talk about market dominance. She talked about the kids. She talked about how a room with good light and a comfortable nook could change a child's life. She talked about the bees. Quentin stood beside her, looking out at the sea of faces, and he realized that this, standing in the shadow of his brilliant partner, was the best view in the world. When they got off stage, clutching the heavy glass trophy, Quentin pulled her towards the exit. "Where are we going? We haven't even had the rubber chicken dinner yet." "I have a better offer," he said. "Roof, now." They took the car, Gary of course, who was now their official company driver on retainer, back to the warehouse. They climbed the stairs to the roof, the trophy tucked under Quentin's arm. It was a clear, crisp night. The city lights twinkled around them, but up here it was peaceful. The hives were quiet for the night, the bees tucked away in their warm golden homes. The scent of lavender and honey hung in the air. Quentin set the trophy down on the wooden platform near the hives. "Not bad for a year's work," he said. "Not bad at all," Amanda agreed, leaning against the railing, looking out at the city. "We built a library. We built a firm. We kept the plants alive." "Mostly," Quentin corrected. "The fern in the lobby is looking a little tragic." "We'll work on it," she said. She turned to face him, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "I'm proud of us, Quentin. We wrote our own rules." "We did," he said. He moved closer to her, his heart starting to hammer against his ribs, a familiar, terrifying, wonderful rhythm. "But there's one rule I think we need to update." "Oh yeah?" she asked, tilting her head. "Which one?" "The partnership agreement," he said. Clause 1, Section A, Thomas and Aberdeen are partners in business and pizza consumption. "It's a solid clause," she said. "It's incomplete," he countered. He reached into his tuxedo pocket. He didn't pull out a ring box. He pulled out a small folded piece of blue paper, a blueprint. "What's this?" she asked. "An addendum," he said. "I drafted it myself, no lawyers." She unfolded the paper. It was a hand-drawn sketch, not of a building, but of a house. A small, messy, wonderful house with a porch and a garden and a dog house labeled Blueprint and a nursery. And in the corner, written in his precise architectural handwriting, were the words, "Proposed project, the rest of our lives, client, us, timeline." She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "Quentin." He knelt down on the gravel roof. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't elegant, it was real. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the ring. It wasn't a massive diamond. It was a band of gold with a tiny, intricate honeycomb pattern etched into the metal. "Amanda Thomas," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I spent my whole life trying to build towers to touch the sky. But I never knew what it was like to fly until I met you." He took her hand. "You are my architect, my disruptor, my queen bee. I don't want to build another thing, not a shelf, not a library, not a life, unless you're holding the other end of the tape measure." He looked her in the eye, baring his soul completely. "Will you marry me? Will you make this a permanent merger? No exit strategy?" A tear rolled down her cheek, catching the moonlight. She let out a laugh that was half sob, half joy. "You had me at no lawyers," she whispered. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his hope blazing bright enough to light up the whole rooftop. "That is a structurally sound, signed-in triplicate, absolute yes," she said. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood up and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with everything he had. It was a kiss that tasted of honey and victory and a future that was wide open. Behind them, in the hive, the colony hummed a low, sleepy note of approval. "So," Amanda said, pulling back slightly, wiping her eyes, "we have a wedding to plan. I'm thinking warehouse chic." "As long as there's classic rock," Quentin said, resting his forehead against hers. "And pizza," she added. "And bees," he finished. They stood there on the roof of their own little kingdom, looking out at the city they had conquered, not by playing its game, but by changing it. They were tired, they were covered in invisible dust, and they were the happiest two people in New York. "Hey, Quentin," Amanda said softly. "Yeah? Tell me about the bees." He smiled, pulling her closer, wrapping his tuxedo jacket around her shoulders against the chill. "Well," he began, his voice a low, happy rumble in the quiet night, "it all starts with a queen." What did you think of the story of Quentin and Amanda? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate their journey from the coffee shop to the rooftop? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And for everyone who has stayed with us until the very end, who believes that the best things in life, love, success, and honey, are worth fighting for, please comment new rules. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more narratives that will change the world.